Okay, I'm Yasmin, and I'm going to be talking about a very important topic today, which is attachment to fathers. There's been a growing curiosity around when it comes to fatherhood, especially in terms of attachment, which tends to be very mother-centric. And one of the major questions, especially that we get at this lab, is what about the fathers? And this brings me to my next point. There's a lot of limitations when it comes to doing research about fathers. For many reasons. It could be hard to conduct the research itself due to working around work schedules, for example. The research that is available is also mostly Western, and the concept of fatherhood is also undergoing major shifts in the 21st century, so the concept in of itself is changing, so research is it's hard to keep up with the trends. So keep that in mind as we're going through the next points. Some of the points might not feel as applicable to you, and that might not sufficiently scratch the surface of what fatherhood could potentially mean. However, that in of itself is a very significant theme of the topic, because the effort to just learn about fathers could really help us grow towards understanding them. So that brings me to another question. How would you describe the role of a father in a single word?
Safety.
Safety.
Provider.
Provider. Okay. So that next. When we tend to think of fatherhood, we like to think of mothers and fathers as having very same and equal roles in a very ideal way. However, the reality is that fathers tend to be more of a provider, a secure base, a safe base. They tend to take on a more protector role, while mothers are seen as more nurturing, caring, sensitive, and that's what actually the research shows. And fathers tend to exhibit more sensitivity and warmth, while mothers are more of a secure safety net that has stability, calm, nurturing, and affection. So that's where we ask, where does the father come in? Fathers are usually not the primary caregivers. They're primary caregivers in 5 to 20% of cases. And they tend to come at a later stage when children start to form multiple attachments as a secondary attachment figure. Does that mean they play a supporting role? No. Fathers serve a purpose from a completely different angle, usually as a connection to the external world, especially through play. They encourage exploration and risk-taking, exposing infants to high stimulation situations that entail high positive arousal or excitement, and they serve as more of a protector figure as children grow confident to practice their autonomy. So they're this connection to an external world, helping children grow confidence. When they do the strange situation procedure, a similar situation they do for fathers is the risky situation procedure. So this kind of shows how their role could be another side of the situation. In fact, this idea of secondary caregivers tends to have a connotation of less important or backup, and this couldn't be further from the truth. I found this very interesting model that kind of explained different perspectives on multiple attachments, and I tried to draw graphics. I made up these graphics to try to illustrate them. First is the monotropic model. This entails that basically mothers or the primary caregiver, whoever the primary caregiver is the most important person and nothing else is important. So whoever is the multiple secondary attachment is not relevant to a child's psychological well-being. The hierarchical model states in the mother or the primary caregiver would be the most important form of attachment, and then the secondary or other forms of multiple later attachments come at more of a hierarchy as a side or a supplementary figure. The independence model looks at the two attachment figures are qualitatively different. They just have different purposes and they're both equally as important, but they just have two different meanings. And then the integration model says we can only understand attachment in the context of other attachments. So it's not that they're both separate, they're both, we should consider them as a holistic whole. They're a family at the end of the day. And you can only understand the role of a mother in the context of the role of a father or in the context of other multiple caregivers, whoever they may be. So, and other roles are just as important. Monotropic models are not sufficient to fully capture the importance of other roles. And to illustrate the importance of fathers, even though they're mostly secondary caregivers, I found some very interesting statistics. Longitudinal studies have shown a lack of early fatherhood development is predictive of traits, things like substance abuse or stress. Father involvement in the early phases also improves mental, cognitive, and physical outcomes. Positive parenting in fatherhood also increases self-regulation skills and pro-social skills. And negative parenting in fatherhood it leads to externalization of problems and reduced cognitive skills. Paternal sensitivity, which is the ability for a father to read cues and respond appropriately, something that, as we previously discussed, is kind of lacking in fathers, was actually associated with cognitive functioning, emotional regulation, and less externalization. And then the quantity, which is the frequency of the father's involvement, and the quality of the involvement, which is warmth, nurturing, and responsiveness. Warmth was also something that was seen more in mothers than fathers, has really significant influences on their social and cognitive development. Initiating activities in early years predicted later educational attainment, and also upward social mobility, which is really indicative of adulthood, adjustment in adulthood. And then less authoritarian styles, which actually fathers tend to have more authoritarian styles in parenting compared to mothers. Basically like more strict kind of parenting styles. It was actually like less of it was associated with less delinquent behaviors and also less stress in the future. So this is also an interesting trend to look at. And so this idea that fathers come as secondary or not as a significant attachment figure has a very biological basis to it. So people tend to have like this biological misconception that one of the main events that happen in attachment, we always talk about when mothers give birth, they release a lot of oxytocin and then the baby bonds through skin to skin. And we think like this biological component is absent in fathers, and hence that's why they are secondary caregivers or not as important. This is actually not the truth. Recent studies have shown that fathers are actually able to match levels, like longitudinal studies looked at fathers within the first 6 months of birth, and they saw that they were able to match their levels of oxytocin with mothers. And also, there was also an effect of vasopressin, another hormone that was encouraging paternal behaviors such as protective behaviors. Oxytocin itself does have to tend to have different purposes in mothers and fathers, which is they tend to correlate more with affectionate behaviors in mothers versus stimulatory behaviors in fathers. But the still existence of it shows that there is a biological, fathers are biologically equipped to bond with their children. So there is not an absence of this component, it just might look a bit different. In fact, it's more relevant to consider society and culture as more of a contributing factor to these differences for many reasons. Fathers tend to take more of a provider role in families. This could mean like they're balancing a full-time job along with becoming a father, and this might reduce or limit their mental and physical capabilities in nurturing a bond with their child in terms of time and effort. There's also a lot of stereotypes and assumptions that fathers are not as essential to attachment, or like it's mainly the mother's role to form this attachment, which means fathers could just simply decide to put effort later in the future or not put effort now, and this creates a self-fulfilling prophecy in which they actually form weaker attachments. And then there's also the authoritarian roles of fathers. So due to gender stereotypes or gender roles, fathers can take more of authoritarian roles, which we saw has negative effects, or like in terms of task management. Mothers are given the more warm and nurturing and affectionate roles, where fathers are given the more pragmatic, logical provider roles. So this could be due to gender stereotypes rather than their inclination to do these roles. And there's also a huge lack of father role models in general. So a very interesting thing I came across my research is even uninvolved fathers, fathers in general, including uninvolved fathers, tend to report that they never they never saw their own fathers as role models. So even their own fathers aren't their role models when it comes to parenting. They say they're doing parenting through other things, through books, or their own wives, or mothers. So fathers are just not parenting figures to them when it comes to learning about parenting. And this is also through other roles in life. We tend to very rarely see males in caregiving fields, such as nurses or nannies or early childhood teachers. It's very rare when we see male figures in these caregiving fields. So it's really hard for boys to model at a young age this feeling of what does a father look like, because it's just not really as available in our society. And then there are also policies in our world or that really limit fathers or comes up at the disadvantage of fathers. For example, when and it's very common, divorce happens in 1 to 2 couples, 1 in 2 couples, and custody policies and custody courts tend to favor the mothers when it comes to the time and scheduling. So fathers just simply cannot have as much access to their child. So a nice example of this is this map. This shows maternity and paternity leave. So the dark blue countries, these have maternity and paternity leave. Light blue countries which is where Egypt is, maternity leave only. Orange countries, no paid leave. And this just is an example of one policy that really illustrates how fathers could just simply be at a disadvantage when it comes to early childhood, and someone has to provide for the family, and sometimes fathers can only be the only ones that are put in that position to have to provide. And maybe, yes, these laws are in place, or these differences in society are in place for a reason. And some fathers are capable to overcome these differences and still form secure bonds with their children, but this doesn't negate that their presence, their very presence is still a barrier when it comes to forming attachment. And it makes sense that they will exacerbate the differences that we see in mothers and fathers. Studies show that fathers are capable of being primary caregivers. So this was a really interesting study I found. It looked at 36 infants, and they compared behaviors of children with moms and their primary caregivers, and dads as their primary caregivers, and dads as their secondary caregivers. Fathers in general, both primary and secondary, tended to engage in more playing. However, primary caretaker fathers were able to display behaviors, affectionate and nurturing behaviors that were comparable to mothers, showing that fathers are capable of having this motherly bond with their children, or this what we define as a motherly kind of bond. So what are the key takeaways? We see how external factors can really act as a barrier for when it comes to fatherhood, and the expectations we tend to have towards fathers can really limit their capabilities and what they are capable of. And trying to understand what fathers are capable of can really break those barriers and explore the true potential of fathers. And it's really important that we challenge the beliefs we have about fatherhood in order to really allow them to flourish and grow as fathers. To take it a step further, people tend to think of attachment as this magical bond that's only exclusive to biological mothers and their children. And while it could feel magical, at the end of the day, attachment takes effort and love. And this is something that's accessible to mothers, fathers, and others. And families tend to take a lot of different shapes and forms, so it's really important to acknowledge that. Any questions?
I love it.
Thank you.
Very comprehensive and very nice. Such a topic that we don't talk about as much في اللاب بالذات about. I want to say that we have a 24-hour paternity leave from Master as well.
This map is from 2018 to be fair.
لا this map أكيد إحنا مش المفروض نبقى عليها غير كده. أكيد إحنا مش في اللي مع الاثنين بس we do have a 24-hour. It's very telling about what we perceive.
24 hours as in we have one day.
For the paperwork actually. It's not on the birth of the مش في اليوم في paperwork which is very telling about what we perceive to be the role of the father.
Even countries that do have both maternity and paternity leave, Tanzania, the maternity leave is much less than the maternity leave. So even those that have both.
And many countries have the 6 months مثلا أو كده, and they can divide it زي ما هم عايزين. So you have a combined 6 months paid leave للأم والأب, and they can divide it. في كندا كده مثلا.
Oh, really? It's really just interesting. And I wanted to highlight this point, and there could be reasons. Of course, mothers might need more time to physically recover, and there could genuinely be a need for mothers to take longer maternity leave. I'm not negating this fact, but it's important to acknowledge that this difference, at the end of the day, they do have different needs, and this will have different effects when it comes to attachment. So in all of these are the same differences as with all of the other studies. There could be a reason that fathers have a lack of involvement in early age, and there could be a biological reason from the role of oxytocin, that mothers have a warm and nurturing role while fathers have a more stimulatory role. And it's not that these explanations don't negate the importance of fatherhood, and it just highlights the differences, and it could be an integrative difference as we saw in the integrative model, and it could be a difference due to sexual differences. But it's really important to just acknowledge these differences and know what role they could potentially play.
Any questions?